1 week after the most exciting and high-scoring game since taking down the Colts in 2021, the Ravens find themselves potentially facing yet another offensive shootout, this time against Jayden Daniels and the Washington Commanders. As I was looking through some stats for these two teams through their first 5 weeks, I noticed a number of similarities in their offensive and defensive rankings. For example, the Ravens are first in the league in running attempts with 172, and the Commanders are second with 168. But while these two teams have some similarities, it's their differences that should make this game extremely interesting for both fan bases. At 4-1, Jayden Daniels has this Commanders team looking the most competitive that we've seen them since Robert Griffin III. Meanwhile, the Ravens are coming off not just their third win in a row, but a huge win against a divisional opponent on the road in Cincinnati. These two teams rank 1 and 2 in points scored in the league, with the Commanders edging the Ravens out by just 8 points. They've faced each other 7 times over their history, with the Ravens leading the series 4-3. And this Sunday looks like another great chapter for a proper battle of the Beltway. Let's get to it. Welcome in, everyone. This is Jordan with Ravens Flash Report. Throw a like on the video if you enjoy this Week 6 preview, subscribe if you're new, and comment down below your thoughts and score predictions for this week's game. Baltimore will host their first NFC opponent of 2024 this Sunday. The Washington Commanders come in as a much more balanced team than the Dallas Cowboys that the Ravens faced in Week 3. In fact, I think a better comparison would be the Buffalo Bills, at least from an offensive standpoint. Now let's go ahead and look at the Commanders' offensive numbers to try to get a better idea of how this team is winning. Daniels leads the NFL in completion percentages by nearly 5% at 77.1%. And while he's only thrown the ball 131 times, completing 101 of them, the Commanders are 14th in receiving yards and 4th in net yards per attempt. As you would expect with so few pass attempts and such a high completion percentage, Daniels has only thrown 2 interceptions, one in each of the last 2 games. The other side of that coin is that he's only thrown 4 touchdowns. When it comes to running the ball, the only team that can really compare with the Ravens are these Commanders. Second in attempts, second in yards, first in touchdowns with 13, and 4th in yards per carry. In 4 out of their 5 games, they've outgained their opponents on the ground, and over the last 2 games, this team is averaging 215.5 rushing yards per game. Now, the math on that gets pretty easy when those two totals are 216 and 215 rushing yards. The one area this Ravens defense is not great at against the run is allowing rushing touchdowns. The Commanders' offense is the best at staying on the field in the league, ranking first in third down conversions and going a perfect 8 for 8 on fourth down conversions. The Ravens defense has not been great at getting teams off the field on third down so far this season, so that's going to be an interesting situation to be aware of in this matchup. We'll get into the players making up this rushing attack in a bit, but let's move over to the Commanders' defense and see if we can find what might work for the Ravens to win on Sunday. In a somewhat ironic twist of fate, the Commanders, while having given up just under 1,000 receiving yards, which has ranked them 13th in the league, they've given up 11 passing touchdowns, making them second to last on defense in that category. They're also tied at the bottom of the league as one of the few defenses who have yet to intercept an opponent's pass. Their run defense is a mixed bag, but looks on the surface, at least, like a mirror opposite to the Ravens' run defense. They've allowed only 3 rushing touchdowns so far this season, but have allowed the 10th most rushing yards. The most worrisome problem facing this Commanders defense when lining up across a Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry-led run game is that they're middle of the pack when it comes to rushing attempts against them at 13th overall. The reason this is a problem is that if teams aren't running the ball the 10th fewest times against them but are allowing the 10th most rushing yards, it means teams are getting good yardage when they do run. The Commanders are 31st in yards per attempt, and with teams averaging 130 yards per game against them and 5.1 per carry, the Ravens offense should be able to take advantage of that and feast in this matchup. Speaking of the Baltimore offense, let's take a look at Lamar Jackson's season numbers as well as what this team has looked like through 5 games. The Ravens have run the second most plays for the most yardage and averaged a ridiculous 6.8 yards per play. Lamar and the Ravens have a similar approach to the passing game as the Commanders in that they focus on more passing efficiency rather than raw numbers. Only 10 teams have thrown the ball fewer times than the Ravens this season, but they have the 9th most passing yardage, the 5th most passing touchdowns, and Lamar has only thrown 1 interception this season. Running the ball, though, is where the Ravens, unsurprisingly, lead the way in several categories. Attempts with 172, yards with 1,056, and probably the scariest stat here, They lead the NFL in yards per attempt with 6.1. As I mentioned with the Commanders' defense, if a team hasn't had many attempts against them but has allowed a lot of rushing yards, they aren't very good at stopping the run. If an offense has the most attempts and still has the highest average of yards per attempt, it means they're really good at running the ball. What takes this Ravens offense to the next level, though, is what we saw them do against the Bengals, and I don't mean just Lamar Jackson. In the past, we've seen this Ravens offense be the most dominant ground game in the league, like in 2019. But we've also seen that if you could stop the run, they weren't really built to beat you through the air. And whether that was due to receiving talent or overly simplistic passing concepts, we may never know. But this Ravens offense just showed us last Sunday that they are more dangerous than the 2019 offense because now they can pivot. The Bengals defense was queuing up on the Ravens' run game, and Derrick Henry in particular, for most of the first half. And so Lamar went from having just 110 passing yards in the first half and 1 touchdown to having 238 in the second, along with 3 of his 4 passing touchdowns. This ability by Todd Monken to change and adapt his play calling to what works, and Lamar's ability to be the truest form of a dual-threat quarterback we've ever seen, means that there really isn't a defense that can hold them down in both the run game and the pass game. The only way to beat the Ravens is to outscore them, and, well, the Commanders may have a chance to do that. Let's take a look at the Ravens' defense. Currently, the Ravens' defense is allowing an average of 25.2 points per game. Now, of course, we can't and shouldn't just cut out the performance against the Bills, as that was for sure their best game of the season so far, but unfortunately, it may have been followed up by one of their worst the very next week in Cincinnati. One of the biggest issues that this Ravens defense could face this Sunday is that what the secondary is worst at, Jayden Daniels seems to be best at, and that's second half passing. The Ravens have allowed opposing quarterbacks an average passer rating of 82.4 in the first half, but in the second half of games it jumps to 116.2. Jayden Daniels' average passer rating in the first half of games is 89, but his second half is an average of 118.2, and that could be a major problem for this Ravens struggling secondary. The ground game, at least, still continues to be ineffective against the Ravens as they continue to lead the league in fewest rushing yards allowed with 302 and the fewest yards per attempt with 3.1. The Commanders certainly have a respectable run game, which I stated before, but just like with the Bills, they haven't faced this Ravens team. Comparing this Ravens run defense to the teams that the Commanders have played so far shows that the Ravens are in a league of their own. Teams have only tried to run the ball on them 99 times through 5 games, which is the 4th fewest, and they're averaging just under 20 carries per game. When it comes to total yards, the Ravens are first overall, and none of the teams the Commanders have faced are anywhere close. The Ravens are allowing an average of 60.4 rushing yards per game. The next closest team to that the Commanders have faced are the Giants, who are 14th overall, allowing an average of 115.4 yards per game, nearly twice as much as the Ravens. And while the Ravens have given up 5 rushing touchdowns on the year, which ranks 22nd overall, they're also leading the league, allowing opponents just 3.1 yards per carry. The Buffalo Bills were a very balanced offense when they faced the Ravens. They also usually were leading most of the time, which allowed them the luxury of running the ball. Once the Ravens took away the run game, they became one-dimensional, and Allen became easier to predict and sack. Let's hope the Ravens defense can do the same thing to the Commanders on Sunday. The Commanders' offensive weapons are as varied as teams like the Bills and the Ravens, relying more on several good pieces rather than one really great piece. Don't misunderstand me, though. Terry McLaurin is a true number 1 receiver for this Commanders team, and while he does take the top spot in targets and yards, the ball is spread around quite evenly after that. Zach Ertz, Olamide Zaccheaus, Noah Brown, and Austin Eckler all have over 100 receiving yards, with Luke McCaffrey and De'Ami Brown just a few yards shy of that mark. And in the run game, Brian Robinson leads the way, followed by Daniels himself, Eckler again, and Jeremy McNichols, all of whom have at least 100 yards on the ground and a touchdown or more. The Ravens' ground game, as we know, is led by Derrick Henry, who doesn't just lead the Ravens, but also the league in rushing yards, along with leading the league in rushing touchdowns, the longest rush so far, most rushing yards per game at 114.4, and most yards from scrimmage with 621. Following Henry, you have the best dual-threat quarterback in the game, Lamar Jackson, who has 363 rushing yards on the season while averaging 6.8 yards per attempt and 72.1 yards per game. Justice Hill fills running back 2 duties and operates as both an effective change of pace back as well as an excellent receiving threat out of the backfield, averaging nearly 10 yards per reception. Baltimore's pass catchers also have a similar distribution to the Commanders. Zay Flowers, of course, leads this group in both targets and yards, followed up by Rashad Bateman, Isaiah Likely, Mark Andrews, and Justice Hill, who all have over 100 yards, with Charlie Kolar and Nelson Aguilar nearing that mark as well. As well as distributing the ball from a target's perspective, passing touchdowns are also distributed, with 6 Ravens having at least one through the first 5 games. Not to mention that every pass catcher outside of the running backs are averaging at least 10 yards per reception. Now, if the NFL knew how good Jayden Daniels and this Washington Commanders team would be at the start of the season, I have no doubt that this Battle of the Beltway game would be in prime time. Both of these teams are looking to succeed this season. The Commanders are looking to win their division for the second time since 2020, and the Ravens are out to correct mistakes of last year's postseason disappointment. Despite the fact that I have compared the Commanders to the Buffalo Bills frequently in this video, I don't expect this game to be anything like the blowout that the Ravens gave the Bills 2 weeks ago in Baltimore. These are two well-balanced teams who are going to give both fan bases a good show on Sunday. As far as a score prediction, I do think the Commanders are a tough challenge for this Ravens team and will be the toughest test for this Ravens defense, especially the secondary. But John Harbaugh has a great record against rookie quarterbacks, and Lamar Jackson has a propensity for stepping up when the competition is at its best. And I don't think either of those things change in this matchup. I have the Ravens winning a close one, 30-27, with a second Justin Tucker game-winning field goal in as many weeks. As always, guys, stay safe out there, and go Ravens.